Okay, good morning. On this really rainy, dark morning, hopefully you can see all this. Today we're going to paint a Baltimore Oriole, and it's a photograph that was taken by Charlie Lipson at Green Lawn Cemetery. I don't know if you are aware, if you're local, of the Green Lawn Cemetery, but it is an arboretum in Salem that's quite beautiful. It's where I grew up, and right across the street, so it's where I played as a child. It's a wonderful exploratory place for children. I put a grisaille down on this, and the grisaille was made up of a warm gray, and I chose a warm gray because the background has a lot of warm gray in it, and I didn't want anything to interfere, any color interfere with that beautiful color. So the first thing we're going to do is a gesture. Now, the easiest way to do a bird, to get the gesture of a bird, is to start first by the belly. Now, I know that the tail I want to be about here, and I know the beak I want to be about here, and that's a wonderful line. It kind of goes like this. And so the belly is going to be in here. I'm using a slightly darker gray to get the color for drawing. And when you do a gesture, if you're not using charcoal, when you do a gesture, you can use a brush and hold back on the brush. So in other words, don't do this because you'll lose the gesture. You want to keep it very loose, and the best way to do that is to take a little bit of your control away and to use the back of the brush. It's not to say I'm not going to do this in some areas, but to start with the gesture. I definitely like to do it this way. And the tail feather comes up here. Might be a little too thick. This kind of goes like that. And for the head on a bird, now they don't really have a neck, right? So you want to find where that edge is on the bottom, right? So it's kind of straight up like this. And the head's about, oh, that might be too big, about here. And it's kind of this oval that's right here. This is actually how I start the drawings with the children, because they understand these shapes. And they, thinking bird at the same time, but at the same time it's a place that they understand, shapes that they understand. The wings come up here. And there's this wonderful straight line that's right about here that has this, it adds to this beautiful, even though he's not in flight, it has this feeling of flight just in its gestured line. So when you do your gesture, close is good enough, because remember, paint makes lines grow, and you're going to be adjusting it throughout the whole thing anyway. This might be a little too big on the belly, so I'm just going to trim that up a little bit. The barrel of his belly is really right down here underneath this wing. And the back of his head connects. Now, what's wonderful about a grisaille, as opposed to just using what do you call it, charcoal, is when you make changes, you can just rub it in. Okay, now that I have him to this point, I'm going to take out some of the lines that I don't need. First, I forgot this part. The black part of his head. think of, when you're traveling a line such as this, think of like hills and valleys. Is it up? Is it down? Is it a peak? Is it a valley? And that helps your brain separate it from exactly what it is, being a bird, because your brain will tell you how it looks. Don't let that happen. And this comes off. This comes off. There's a black markings right here. A little more of the orange is there. I've only seen one of these in my garden. They probably go to green lawn because there's two beautiful ponds there. One is very large, and the other one is kind of like a small Japanese pond. It's really quite beautiful with a cement bridge. Ponds generally have koi fish, but I believe sometimes some of the wildlife eat the koi. From what I understand, I'm not exactly certain on that. I do know that they've had trouble a few years with the koi, but some of the koi is, oh my goodness. Last time I actually painted on location there, I saw a koi that was like at least a foot long. They're quite beautiful. This guy's beak is open a little bit. He's probably saying hello to Charlie, who photographs the birds all the time. In my book, The Salmon's Run, I have a chapter that talks about being at Green Lawn. Bottom beak is just a scotch longer than the top. Okay. Isn't it interesting how those groups of shapes can suddenly become a bird like that? Now, before I place his feet or foot, you don't see the other one, I'm going to throw in this leaf here. It's a beautiful heart-shaped leaf. It looks like he's on some type of a fruit tree. Maybe a cherry. Not sure. The thing about green lawn is, and what gives it arboretum status, is there are hundreds of different species of trees. Some of them are so incredible that I'd never seen anywhere else. Like they have a Kentucky coffee tree. Never heard of such a thing. And they also have a California sequoia there, believe it or not, in Salem. It's definitely worth a ride, and where it's located is if you go up North Street in Salem, and there's, I think it's called Moody Square. There's King's Roast Beef is on one side, that's if you're heading from Marblehead. King's Roast Beef is on your left. And there's a barbershop across the street. And if you are at those lights and you look over to your right, you will see a beautiful wrought iron fence similar to the one at Salem Common, and that is Green Lawn. So it's kind of a soft right at the lights at Moody Square. There's a group called Friends of Green Lawn Cemetery, which I belong to. We have been trying to get, there was a beautiful Victorian greenhouse there when I was a child, and we're trying to get that rebuilt along with the restoration of the chapel, which is a Gothic chapel, which is quite beautiful also. When I was a child, my first time entering Green Lawn was such an amazing experience for me that I never forgot it. And I was in first grade, and I literally lived across the street, although I had to cross North Street. I lived right behind King's Roast Beef. And I saw this beautiful fence, and it reminded me of Salem Common because I had come from living down by the Common. And I missed going to the Common, so I thought, you know, being a little kid, I thought, oh, they have a Common here too. I'm going to go take a look at it. So I walk in there, and to my surprise, it was a cemetery. But I also recognized, even at such a young age, just how beautiful it was. And the birds were singing, and squirrels were running around, and it was just quite beautiful. And so I just started following it, and then I hear this sound, and I couldn't quite figure out what it was, but it sounded like a waterfall. And I thought to myself, how can there be a waterfall? And I followed the sound till I found myself near the small pond. And it wasn't a waterfall, but it was a fountain. And I sat on the bridge. It's a beautiful cement bridge. It looks like it's kind of a WPA project. You know, those cement structures, like similar to the wall at the Salem Willows. And I sat on the wall, and I watched all the wildlife there. Oh my gosh, I was mesmerized by it. And they had these big, huge stairs that were also cement that went straight up and to another section of the cemetery. And after a while, I started walking along, and I found the big pond, which also had a fountain and was making quite a bit of noise. And then I saw the turtles. Oh my goodness. Hundreds of snapping turtles sitting on a log, which the log is still there. Maybe it's a different log, but they still have a log. And all sunning themselves on this log. They were so wonderful. And there was cranes and all sorts of things. And there was this willow tree that had a branch that hung out over the pond. And I loved to climb trees as a kid. And I couldn't help myself. I climbed up the willow tree and sat on that branch, looking out over that pond and thinking to myself that this was the best place on earth. And here I am all these years later, and I still feel that way. It's quite a treasure. Okay, I'm just going to give a little suggestion of the darks back here. So there's your drawing, pretty much. Oh, I forgot his foot. And there he is. Okay, where do we start? Let's start first with the blacks and knock those in. Let's see, I'm going to use a number 2 Blick Filbert Red Sable. And I made my black with Hooker's Green and a little bit of dark purple and a little bit of alizarin crimson. You can make your black with dark blue and dark brown. Sometimes black can dry on a matte kind of feel once the painting is all dry. And if yours does that, then what you can do is you can either put a glaze on it. You know, you have to wait at least 6 months to a year before you can glaze something like a varnish. Or you can use the mixture that I am using, which for some reason doesn't give you that flat stuff. Now they do make blacks that are like in a tube, you know, like ivory black and lamp black and bone black, you know. Oops. Actually, ivory black is a bone black. And yes, it's made from bones. Weird. Used to be made from ivory, but of course it's not anymore. These birds are so beautiful. It was such a treat when I saw one in my yard once. Back when my pond was running. You know, wildlife art is a genre that is very lucrative. A lot of people don't realize that. But wildlife artists can get between $20,000 and $50,000 for a good piece. Oh, jeez, my hands are so shaky. Fix that with the background. Now, those are not directly painted paintings. Those are usually, you know, very laborious, you know, glazes and scumbles and direct paint too, but there's a lot that goes into them, and usually they're very large. They're not 8 by 10s. But, you know, wildlife artists that do birds, like, I mean, think of Audubon, you know. And some of them do, like, African animals and so forth. I do love painting birds, I have to admit. Okay, so there's a bit of a black area here. We're just going to knock this in. Because remember, we're going to do another video for the final of this. This won't be the beginning of the end. Although, if you are a child, you may want to stop at the end of this one. This part here, even though there's some gray in here, I'm going to keep this one open, but even though there's some gray in here, I'm just going to fill that all in with black, because we can put the gray on top after, because by the time we get back to it again, it'll be somewhat dry. My hands are so shaky this morning, thanks to the lupus. There's this little spot that's here, and part of his foot. Now, some of the branches are also dark, but I don't think I'll use the black for that. I think what I'll use is sepia. Or if you want, you can use raw umber. And when I do a branch like this, the best way to do it would be to roll your brush. So you're rolling it like this. So that way you get all of it. But what happens is, at the same time, it creates flat planes that makes the branch look more real, as opposed to a curved line, because branches do not have curved lines. As curvy as they look, they do not have curved lines. They're made up of a series of straight lines. And, oops, I forgot one down here. It's part of this one, I guess. So the light on this guy is coming, he's in shadow of other leaves, it looks like, because it looks like the light is coming from this way here. So like the tail's getting the light, this top of this leaf is getting the light, so it's coming from this way. Always analyze that light. That way you understand where you're going with these 6 lights, right? Ooh, I forgot one in here too. Okay, now before I add the orange onto this, I'm going to throw a little bit of this darkness. Oh, I keep pointing to the iPad that you can't see. To this darkness that's back here. And I'm going to take some sepia with a little tiny bit of the gray that I made from the grisaille. And I'm going to make it just a little bit lighter than it actually is in the photograph, because being an artist, you have this freedom to do that. And it's probably a trunk of another tree or trunk of the tree that he's on. I'm not sure. If I had made this as dark as what it is in the picture, you would kind of lose the back of his wing a little bit. So we don't want to do that. So we're just going to make it a little bit lighter. And there are some expired flower buds on this too. That will be one of the last things we do. We won't put it in this stage. Now you can do this layer very thin, or you could do it a little bit thicker than thin, which is what I'm doing right now. So this is basically a warm gray. You could use raw umber and a little bit of white. Maybe throw in a little bit of yellow ochre if you want to get exactly this color. Okay, now there's, in this background there are some muted green leaves, like really muted. So I think, and they're kind of light. So you're going to make a green with dark blue and, I'm sorry, light blue, so like a cerulean, yellow, cat yellow, and white. Kind of makes like a celadon color. And I'm going to do this one a little thin because I know I'm going to add to it next time. Figure out a way to clamp this down so it doesn't move off the view of the camera. I love this color, as you can tell by my walls. Actually, my whole kitchen's this color too. And some of my studio downstairs is this color. I don't know what it is about this color, I just love it. Isn't he beautiful? Now, I cropped in from Charlie's original photo. He had more of the tree and so forth, and since we were focusing on the bird, I cropped it in a little bit more. Okay, let's throw a color in that background. It's kind of white, but not really, kind of an unbleached kind of titanium, maybe with a little bit of regular titanium mixed together. You don't want to go too white because you may want to add some key white parts later. So just because, you know, the surface of a canvas before you paint on it is acrylic. So if you have a white background, you never want to just leave it white. You know, you want to throw in some oil color because that will definitely dry a different kind of sheen. I shouldn't say never. You might want to experiment with things and you might want that, and that's okay. This to become part of the background, so I'm just going to rub that down so that I don't have any sharp edges, you know. Wait till we get that orange belly in there. I am kind of thinning out this background a little bit, once again, because I don't want it too thick above the bird. I don't want my hand in the way either as I show you this. If you notice, I'm not being super careful because I know I'm going to go back in. But I can tell you that everything in the background has a soft line because of his depth of field on his camera. I had to use an indoor light here this morning because it's so dark out because of the storms. Not sure how that's going to come out. I hope it works. It is a daylight light. I just picked up that purple. I want to trim that. So just do a little bit of a trim right now. want your stroke directions to not feel like it's outlining. So if you find any spots where it has picked up some paint and then has made a weird kind of halo around things, you want to get rid of those, because that's going to confuse the drawing. An outlining line is a drawing line, and you don't want that. I'm just going to throw a light in up here, and we'll do those details in the last layer. Okay, now let's do some quick leaves, and then we'll go to his belly. So I'm going to make them just slightly darker than they will be in the final, because I want to be able to add reflected light and highlights on these. So when you're looking at these leaves, I want you to look at the shapes of the color. So this one has a shape that's kind of like this. It's too thin. I want it a little thicker. Once again, making it darker than it actually is in the photograph, so that I can find the form of it with some reflected lights. It's an interesting shape in that leaf, that the darkness. I love abstractions like that. Every painting is filled with abstractions. This one here, almost the whole thing is dark. Painting birds is a wonderful beginner subject. You know, I know we all have a tendency to lean towards one thing or another, whether it be landscape or portraiture or whatnot. But learning to paint is really about learning to paint. It's not about the subject matter. And it's, you know, once again, going through all those foundations, you know, measuring and drawing, value and light, color and temperature. All those foundations are exactly the same for every genre, you know, other than probably abstractions and stuff, but, you know, every subject matter, I should say. Okay. Let's throw in those lights. Now, once you do your darks, you know what's left over are your lights, because we're reducing this to light side, dark side. Light side is the side that the light is hitting, and dark side is the other side. And if you stick to reducing it very simply to start with those two things, and then adding the reflected lights and highlights after, then you will find that you will learn the 6 lights faster. And I have kids that are very young that learn these 6 lights. By the time the child goes through Acorn, especially if they start with me at, say, the age of 5 or 6, and they stay with me through high school. By the time they leave high school and go off to college, if they're going to school for art, they're usually entering college at a second-year college level of understanding for drawing and painting. Because, nothing's learned overnight, and, don't be discouraged if you're having a hard time, because it takes practice like anything else. Sometimes I refer to this stage of a painting as a mapping. I still consider it part of the drawing. I don't consider it part of the painting. It's an underpainting or a mapping or a wash. Often when I post a picture in this stage, people say, oh, you should stop right there. And it's like, nah, I can't do that. All right, let's put in that orange. So you're going to need some cadmium red for this one. I like the cadmium red light because it's a little more orangey. And you could add some cadmium yellow to make the lighter orange. You could use the cadmium red light straight for the darker one. So let's start with that first. Ooh, look at that. And remember, this is still the underpainting. There's all sorts of little feather doodles you're going to be doing in there, adjusting wings and so forth. And some of things, like, for instance, this line here, it's going to be softened quite a bit once you do the second layer. But you can't soften something that's not there to begin with, so you have to put it there. In my last video, I made a reference that painting is often like writing. If you think of your first draft, and your first draft is to basically set the tone and figure out the storyline and so forth, and not necessarily refine the dialogue. And then your next draft, you refine it more, see how you could say that sentence with less words. And then, you have many more drafts in writing than you do probably in painting, but in painting you can have, probably about 4 or 5 layers in one painting once you really get going at it. Okay, I'm going to take a lighter orange. Is this light enough? Yep. And once again, we're making him just a little tiny bit darker than he will be in the end. I have a lot of birds in my garden. It's funny how the birds get to know the gardener. One day I was sitting on my garden swing, and a bunch of these gray birds, I think they were towhees, sat on a branch, like directly across from me. They were only like not even 5 feet away. They were like, I could have reached out and touched them. And there was like 6 of them. It must have been like a whole family because it was spring. And they started squawking at me like crazy, like literally in my face, like they were trying to tell me something. And I'm sitting there and I'm talking to them. I'm saying, what are you doing? What do you need? And then I thought, birds, what do they need? And I look over and I saw that the bird feeder was empty. So I started laughing. And I said, oh, okay, I'll serve you up. And I went over and filled the bird feeder. And they sat on that bench, on that tree rather, until it was all filled up. And then they immediately went over to the bird feeder after I sat back down on the garden swing. I felt like I was in the middle of a Disney movie. It was really funny. Another time I was in the garden and I had got some new bird feed. And I was looking at it because I was trying to see, because it was a different kind than I normally got. And I was looking at it and thinking to myself, what is in this bird feed? What do these guys eat? And as I was looking at it, a chickadee came to my hand, because I had it in my hand like this. And I'm like, what is that stuff? And this chickadee comes and sits on my hand. Well, let me tell you, it grossed me right out. I am not a person that enjoys feeding birds on my hand. Just going to put that out there right now. I screamed. It was like 6 in the morning, and I screamed, and of course it flew away. And I was like, ew, ew, and I immediately ran in the house and washed my hands. Oh. Yeah. I'm just going to throw in a few of these stripes to give an indication. Now they're going to come out a little purple because I have purple in there, but you know what? I like purple. I don't mind that. Gives it a little more, because black, when it's in light, will often be purple or blue depending on the type of light. Think of Superman's hair, right? His highlights are blue. I'm just going to throw a gray in here. I did not do the gray on the branches because I'm trying to decide what kind of temperature gray I want for that. I don't want it to be this, and I don't want it to be this or that. So I'm just going to think about that for a couple of days. And the gray that I'm using in here, even though it looks purple, it's mixing. That's why it's looking purple. It's actually the grisaille color, just not thinned out so much. And we're going to put some in here. Oh, I forgot the dark inside his beak. We're going to put a little one right here, just an indication. And let me put that dark inside his beak again. There's going to be a lot more detail in this. Okay, there you have day one. We'll make a decision about these branches later. You know what might be nice is even though the photograph doesn't show it at all, is something that leans towards yellow ochre. Might be a really nice color to put back there. Remember, the photograph is limiting on its color. So as an artist, you have the right to change the color or to emphasize one over another. And I think that this is going to be a really beautiful painting. Okay, so have a great day. Hope it doesn't rain, although I think it is already. And I'll talk to you next time. Okay, here it is straight on. Notice there's not a lot of detail in the head, but the photograph doesn't have that either, but we're going to add to that. So you have a great day. Stay dry, stay warm, stay healthy, and we'll see you next time.